Think of those Africans on the border with Spain, on the Moroccan coast in Melilla and Chita. I'd be sure that they would like to work legally in the European Union.
Che ci sono servizi alla persona, turismo, agricoltura, lavori pubblici, settori importanti dei quali è fondamentale l'apporto dei migranti.
Decent work is something that is inimical to the values of the European Union.
L'Europe n'est pas un pourvoyeur de misère.
And this will ensure that third country migrants will fill real gaps in the labour market that cannot be filled by EU citizens.
Il devrait mettre fin, du moins je l'espère, aux pires abus pratiqués en Italie, en Grèce, en Espagne, mais aussi ailleurs.
The true cost behind the cheap produce that the consumer would want to buy, whether it's vegetables, fruit, fish, meat, might in fact be exploitation, misery, and that's something that all the population should be aware of, that behind the cheap produce that they would want to buy in supermarkets, there might be a human story.
Ron Falconer has seen his fair share of heartbreaking stories in Aberdeen as a caseworker with a local organisation dealing with discrimination and victimisation of migrants.
With regards to seasonal workers, what has been reported to me in the past is exploitation. Exploitation in farming, exploitation in strawberry picking. One particular case where a young woman who was of East European origin produced a wage slip which showed that she was actually due her employer £4.11 because so many deductions had been taken from her wages that she was actually earning nothing.
Despite the conditions, these workers come every year, but you won't see them. They're hidden from society, behind factory doors, living in steel containers along rivers, ready to head to work as the seasons change, and often go home penniless, in debt, or are trapped in the country due to their exploitation, and are thus unwilling to face a camera. Trade union representative Tommy Campbell speaks for those who feel they have no voice.
Obviously, the workers themselves are afraid to speak out about it. That the culture of fear is done for a particular purpose. Not only are they then ripping the workers off in terms of the wages, what we find is that the employer tends to provide the accommodation as well. So they're actually tied to the job in that sense. And then worse than that, not only are they paying the wages on the one hand, they're then taking the wages back off that worker by charging them exorbitant rents, and also in some cases charging them costs for the food and the electricity and the water as well.
The International Labour Organization defines this as bonded labour. What's even more chilling is how women are particularly at risk when issues arise with their accommodation.
I have heard of that, where there has been it implied that where women were unable to pay their rent because of lack of wages, that they might want to find other ways to pay their employer or for the employer to use them. And basically encourage them to get involved in the sex trade.
Europe needs migrant workers to maintain productivity. The European Commission estimates that 100,000 third country seasonal workers come to the EU every year, but some unscrupulous employers are taking advantage.
There could be racism and discrimination, but the real factor behind it is just greed. And linked to that is that there is no real deterrent. You know, if for instance, someone is exploited at their place of employment, don't know their rights, don't know their support out there, all they're going to do is to move on elsewhere, and the exploitation and the greed just continues. It's almost like self-perpetuating.
These images were filmed for European NGO Picum, which protects the rights of undocumented migrants. They show the makeshift camps of seasonal workers in southeastern Spain. The region of Almeria is dubbed the Garden of Europe for its high productivity. The reality for workers is sometimes physical and psychological suffering. We met Picum representative Yves Geddy in Brussels, who told us that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
There's a huge amount we're not hearing about. We have to remember many seasonal workers are working in very isolated conditions. You know, we talk about Sweden or Finland, you know, the very north of the country where we have seasonal workers doing berry picking. from Thailand and from Malaysia. In Spain and Italy, these are the areas we see more coverage of, in greenhouses and isolated farms. These aren't migrants who are working in the cities where there's a large concentration of NGOs and information providers. So de facto, they're in a very vulnerable situation, and the exploitation that they experience often doesn't trickle through to us.
Pickham were active in consulting the European Parliament on the new Seasonal Workers Directive, which seeks to ensure equal pay for equal work and establishes minimum standards for these workers across the board. It also provides penalties to hit crooked employers where it hurts, their pockets.
It gives us huge hope that there's finally a recognition that you can't have one group of workers being treated differently, and that to guarantee rights in a certain sector you have to guarantee it for all workers. However, the whole negotiation stage of this directive did show that the issue of undocumented workers remains highly politicised, and that it's very, very hard to get political will to address the exploitation of these workers in the EU.
Migrants who work in seasonal jobs can often find themselves without the correct documentation to stay in the country as a result of exploitation. The issue of immigration has become a political hot potato, and it will only become hotter as the 2014 European election date nears. But what people should remember is, like Ron said, there's often a human story behind the war of words.